Hello for people that are joining us on the stream. If you're not in the Tinker Tabletop channel, which would be impressive, we are going to be doing a casual walkthrough of Roll20 features, and then do some Q&A and some demonstrations. And we've got here tonight with us, we have Rue Cinnamon or Dan.
Hoi hoi.
We have Locus.
Hi.
Providing questions, I hope, are Bryn
Possibly.
and Eva.
Hi, I'm not providing questions, I'm just providing raw entertainment.
Okay.
That's a lie. I'm going to be asking a lot.
Okay. That's good, because that'll at least give me something to answer. I was a little worried setting up for this that I'd just be rambling for an hour.
I mean, I'm not promising there'll be relevant questions, but there'll be questions.
That works. Okay, so let's switch over to a page I think most people will at least understand. This is your recent games tab. It's basically where you go when you log in to Roll20. And what we're going to do, I think starting off, I think the easiest thing is how do I create a game and what kind of settings do what. Because honestly, I think a lot of people look at a lot of the settings that they have, and it's really pretty intimidating, honestly. So we're just going to walk through each thing on the page, show you how it goes together, then we'll talk about tools, and then we'll split into maybe more direct conversation. I'll talk about character sheet stuff, and Dan's going to be talking about mapping. So I'll try not to overlap things on his, and we'll go from there. Okay? At least that's my plan. So up here in the, let's see, can you see my mouse? I may need to change my settings here. Hold on. Show mouse. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see my mouse on the screen. Yeah, there we go. You've got your individual games that are recently played here. And then up in the upper, well, I guess it's middle, actually, but the middle left, there's a thing that says Create New Game. Pretty basic there. But you've got a lot, you're going to start seeing a lot of options as we move forward, and this is sort of the first hurdle. So the first thing is a name for a game. I really don't necessarily recommend naming your game as the first thing you're doing. Unless you've already got a name picked out, just put something down. We're going to put example in this case. You don't have to do tags unless you've got so many games you can't find it. Now you've got character sheets. Roll20 has a kind of ridiculous amount of potential character sheets, and sometimes you've got legacy sheets, you've got official sheets. But a lot of these sheets have been produced not only by Roll20, but also by the users. So you've got even some systems that I've never even heard of in here, which is great, because it gives you a chance to kind of see what other games are out there, and maybe actually to go search through them. I know it's caused me to do at least a few Google searches to find out, oh my gosh, they have a Babylon 5 game kind of a thing? Yeah, they do. And they have a character sheet for it. And basically what you're going to do is you just need to choose the character sheet you want to do and throw it up there. Now, I believe if you are a Plus member or better, that's Plus or Pro, you also have the option for Custom. I'm not going to go too in deep for this right now, because I'll cover that a little bit better when we get back to that part. The third part of this page, there are actually nowadays, there are modules that you can put straight in. The Monsters Vault is a free one that you can just straight in add in. It'll put maps in place for you, create tokens, pretty much set up everything you need to play the game. And they're starting, and it's certainly not complete yet, but in their marketplace, they have all sorts of these pre-made modules. So if you don't know where to start at all, you don't want to do mapping, you're not sure exactly, where to begin on these things, if you know the system you want, or at least a topic you'd like to cover, you might be able to find in the marketplace pre-made for you. And there's nothing wrong with using something like that to get yourself off the ground. Anything that makes GMing easier for you is great. Do not, as a GM, make your life harder just because of pride. Do what you can to make it easier, because you'll have more fun and your players will have more fun if you are able to use what exists and not destroy yourself by trying to make things by scratch. I'm a horrible hypocrite in that sense, but at the same time, I want things in a certain way. And you might too, which we'll get to what you can do to do those things pretty soon. But since I don't want any of these modules, there's 2 places you can click I'm ready to create game. One right under the name, so if you don't even want to deal with this stuff immediately, you just click right there. Or all the way at the bottom, big old I'm ready create game. And I'm pretty sure this will pop us, yeah, right here. This is basically your game page. This will allow you to fill things in, put information out for players, those kind of things. You can choose what game system you're using. This is mostly useful if you're going to put it as a public game, because you can actually advertise your game through Roll20. So if you don't have enough people to fill your group, you can put it out there and bring in people you don't know. You got to be pretty brave to do that, I think. Maybe because I'm not a super social person, but it's definitely an option that you can do. What's also nice is there's a calendar here. You can actually choose when your next game will be. So let's say our game is tonight. I'm going to say 7 o'clock. And yeah, it's already past 7, so starting at 7:15. Then we save that. We've got a place here to enter a description. So you can put in what you want. And then players will be able to read that. It'll be a little blurb. We've also got some other things that are fairly important. We have game add-ons. This is brand new, so if you haven't used Roll20 in a while, this is something that's just been added recently. And there's only one option under this, and that's the Roll20 Pro map pack. So if you have a Pro, or I believe a Plus actually, I think you get it as Plus, you can also add this in, which will give you a bunch of pre-made maps that you can just use. There's all sorts of settings. They're a little more geared towards fantasy settings, but, you know, it's an option if it helps you. So I'm going to add that to game so you can see what that's like. Certainly at least to explain what the different levels of bonuses talk about. You've also got your own specialized forum built into this page. This is your recent game discussions. So if you want to start discussions and don't want to manage it in a separate text thing like we have on Tinker Tabletop, you can actually do it right here on the game page. And it's just literally a mini forum just for your campaign. Coming up top here, we've got Chat Archive, which will allow you to look at all the roles in chat that you've used before if you want to look up a specific role or time without loading into the game entirely. Or the External Journal. The External Journal is just that. It's access to your handouts, to your character sheets, without launching the game.
Really fun to say as well.
It is. Looking for players is an option where you can quite literally create a listing for your game. Like I said, if you want to get people or you just can't get enough players for your game, that's one thing you can do. It would allow you to basically bring in people that would be available from all around the world. Right here, this is your background image. You can either drop a file. What they mean is from your desktop, you can drag a file into this box here, or you can choose a file. Okay? I'm not going to do that because it really isn't necessary for that, but that's pretty much the basics of it. Drag and drop, it'll realize it and load it, or choose a file and upload it. Really very easy. I don't know if I want to do settings until later, but there's a lot of other settings for the campaign. Let me first go ahead and... let me see if I can send this out to some people. Oh, it didn't work. So there we go. We've got some invites out here to bring 2 other co-GMs here so we can do things. So if they can go ahead and accept that so we can get going.
Yep, it should be in there.
Okay, I'll refresh.
Yeah, it should be in there too.
There we go. And you can actually... Okay, this is the other command. You see these are players now in our game. And you've got two options with players. Basically, carrot or the stick. You have promote to GM, in which case they will be a co-GM along with you. Or you can kick from the game. There sadly isn't a timeout or mute things or anything like that. There are really only those two options. But that does at least let you have some control over what those players can do in your system. So now that we've got those two players in there, we can go to launch game. And this is going to take you to a whole different page. This is actually your play field. And we've got several distinct sections here. This is going to be your chat window, right here. This green tab is what's called the starter tab. And it's basically going to say welcome. It'll tell you, pretty much describe how to use the system. How to do your roles, the /roll, and then how to write the formats. You can even do formulas, which will actually allow you to set up things. And you can use shortcuts, /R, which saves a heck of a lot of time. GM rolls, or /GM roll, and then your dice, means that it's a roll that no one else will see but you. Okay? And the shortcut for that is GR. You can also send messages directly to someone without everyone else having to read them using the /W, then the name, which it will autocomplete for you, and then the message you want to send. And that's what that is. This is the text box down here. Something that I think confuses a lot of players, too, is you see this thing that says as. You can actually change that to another character in the game. So if you're playing a certain character or playing multiple characters, or if you're GMing and you want to be fancy with it, you can actually select one of those in order to have an emote or something like that show up, or have a dice roll be specifically for that person. As long as a character handout or token exists for that character, you can select it and change that.
And there's no shortage of games that actually do it all through text.
Why in the world am I doing this
But
myself?
the game, like Roll20, also does have a built-in both VoIP and webcam system, which we probably should show them how to turn off before we create an accidental echo.
We should. So I'm going to point this out where it is. All of your game settings, while you're in this thing, are right over here in the upper right-hand corner. You see this gear that says My Settings. And you've got a bunch of things you can check. You've got your token bar settings, which we'll get to, deck size, chat avatars. I personally love to have it as names only, because I don't think the chat avatars really hide in the game much. But if you are running video, you can actually change where the video avatar is located. You can allow players to move their screens around, so it's a little more appropriate within the play field. And right here you've got video and audio chat options, and we've got chat tech. Because we're using Roll20, we pretty much only do none for most of our Tinker Tabletop games, and it's going to restart. That way it doesn't try to load people's audio or video. And when the GM does that, that should set the settings for everyone in the chat. So you don't have to worry about players accidentally turning it on and two players talking to each other in one system and two players on another. As soon as the GM sets what the chat tech is, it will change it for everyone involved. Let's go all the way back at the top. You've got your display name here, so what you want to be shown as. And you can change that and as pretty much as you want, because it doesn't change your profile name in the actual game. It only changes your display name in this game. Very important thing, master music volume level. The jukebox tends to play quite loud. So if you don't want to be deafened, it's generally a good idea to do half or less. I've found that if you just pull the jukebox up on the full master level, sometimes it will blast your ears out, and sometimes you'll barely be able to hear it. It really depends on which company is putting it out there. Since we're not using SoundCloud anymore, which was the old system,
No more slam jams.
no more Slam Jams, no more Bayou Overdrive, no more Carlito. It's
Aw.
A little sad, but we moved on, and I'll get to the jukebox here in just a little bit. Enabled background cheap. What that means is that anytime someone rolls, if someone could roll for me. There we go. You hear that whoop, and it highlights right here that someone has rolled a 20. They didn't roll 1d20, they rolled just a 20. But that's what we need to know. So you can actually turn that off. So if you don't want to constantly hear whoop, 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 especially as a GM, and you're working on things, it might be distracting. But then it might also remind you, oh yeah, my players are doing things and I need to be focusing on that tab.
That was a legitimate 20.
Was it a legitimate 20?
Look at that, rolling d20. It's got the thing in the back.
You're right. Actually, that is a legitimate 20. Okay, well, alright then. I thought you had to put the 1 for it to count that. Oh no, it's /R20 if you just want to roll 20.
Yes.
That's right. Okay.
You'll also notice, just since we can see this, just for easy thing, especially if you're looking in chat logs, that 20 is highlighted green, and that shows a maximum value, just like a minimum value will be highlighted red.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing, you can enable advanced dice icons. Dice icons are basically drag and drop. That's a feature I don't think I've really used very much, but it's a neat thing you can do. You can actually pull that value off of a roll and put it on the tabletop. So if you need to keep track, for example, of initiative, or you just want to keep track of how many times someone rolls this, that, or the other, or you need to compare something, you can just drag it right from that option right onto the table.
Say you're playing a game like Fiasco, and you need to hold on to dice rolls, and you kind of spend them.
Right. What's also worth noting is that you see here that my 7 that I rolled is the same color as my user color. And by right-clicking there, you can change your user color pretty much to anything you want. But you can see that this dice and that were the same color, though now I've changed it. But you get what I'm saying. Dan's is the same color as Dan. And that's the way you can keep track of who's rolling what. Enable 3D dice. 3D dice is a very cool, but very resource-intensive thing. Dan, if you could roll me another d20. So now that we have 3D dice enabled... Oh, I didn't do it. Okay, well, I'll do it then. Now that we have 3D dice enabled, if I click my roll d20, it's going to ask me to drag and drop. So I'm just going to choose a direction. And you see it bouncing around the screen. And I rolled another 7. Wow.
Lucky number 7.
I guess I just happened to roll a 7. But that's what 3D dice is. It's very cool. It looks really neat when you roll like /R6d10.
Yeah, and then you get up to that like bucket of d6 for a fireball, and then your computer chugs to a halt.
Yeah, it looks cool, but it is very resource intensive. So I would caution against using it unless you just really... I don't know. Unless it's something that really tickles you. And it's cool. It looks great. And it's really cool when other people do it. Which, speaking of which, you've also got automatically roll 3D dice. And I thought there was an option here so you could see other people's 3D dice. Oh, I don't think you have 3D dice enabled, Dan. That may be what it is. But if you want to really go for that over-the-top sort of, hey, we're rolling dice, there we go. It's really cool to see other people's dice rolls. But at the same time, you're also going to have to worry about that additional resource cost as far as your computer, and if you're streaming and doing that, or if someone else is streaming and everyone's 3D rolling dice, it's something to keep, basically, keep in mind. Chat avatars. So you notice here that we've got our little pictures right next to us when we rolled. when we roll, those are chat avatars. If you don't like them, you can disable them, but I've never found it particularly offensive to keep them. Makes it a little easier for me to see who did what. If you're really conscious about or happen to forget who rolled last, or did someone roll something, or am I looking at a new roll, there's timestamps. So you can actually turn on the timestamp and see what time certain rolls came in. But it only does it for generally like roll. If they're less than a minute apart, they're not going to tell you 7:24 and 30 seconds sort of thing. They're only going to tell you directly what it comes to. And then alphabetically sort token actions. Now this is that's almost for a whole other discussion with token actions. Token actions are macros that are tied specifically to tokens. I can add a token here, but I think I'll worry about token actions when we get to the media stuff. But that's a minor issue. You can also, as a GM, clear the current chat log. So if you've got a ridiculous amount of stuff and you just want to be able to see it, you can turn it off. If you don't need to do that, I generally don't, because I like having a record of it. Moving on. Tokens, and again I'm going to touch this. You've got 3 colors on tokens. These tokens can be changed, and it'll take any hex code, hex interval too. So if you don't like these pre-made colors, just put a different hex code in here. It's all hexadecimal based. It's really easy to change. You can also change where those bars are. You can put them at the top, bottom, left, or right, depending on what looks good for your setting. So that's really up to you. It's just more customization to kind of make your game look the way you want to. Deck size. As much as there are bad jokes that could be made about this one, it just literally lets you choose how large a deck of cards is, because this system actually has a built-in card drawing system. And you can do custom cards, change the backs, change the fronts, everything like that. It's actually really nice, especially if you're making custom settings, or if you just need something to speed up game. I know there are a lot of systems that use cards a lot, especially for loot, or for GMs using clues, those kind of things. That's pretty much it for settings. That is one of the sloggiest sections in Roll20, and as you can see, it's really not that complicated. Some things I did skip is use window pop-outs for character. This is incredibly handy because it basically creates a new window that has the character sheet in it. So if you have a multi-monitor setup like I do, it just allows you to pop out a character sheet, move it to the side, and it's a lot easier for you to access as needed. Is it for everyone? Nah, especially if you're just using one monitor. I don't think you're going to get the kind of advantage that you would if you had multiple monitors and could move them about. Advanced keyboard shortcuts. That's almost enough for a whole other video. I'm not going to cover these. If you want to look through them, there's actually a little question mark you can click right next to it that'll show you every single one, show you how to use it. If you can get good at these shortcuts, you can do some really high-speed GMing. But I don't see it as really super needed. At least to me. For some people, I'm sure it's quite useful. But moving back to where we were in the chat log here, right next to it, we have the art library. This is incredibly powerful. Not only is it basically a search window tool just for, mostly for role-playing tabletop assets that are online via different forums and databases, but it also has their marketplace, the things you've uploaded.
Oh, does it ever?
Yeah, and it keeps track of everything, yes. So I'm going to start here with premium assets. This is not selling, you don't have to use them. I am just using it as an example. If it'll pop up. Oh, that's what these are, okay. So for example, I've got marketplace purchases because I am lazy. That's the plain thing. Some of these I got for free because I backed a Kickstarter. Some of them I got for various things. I love, for example, these quick encounters. These are pre-made maps, and this is on token layer, so this is not where it should go. But these are pre-made maps that basically you can just drag and drop onto a grid set and use in-game. If you're just looking for something quick, it's fantastic. And more often than not, there is probably a thematic setting that you can use. And they include even, like, helpful things, so you know the difference between the different types of tunnels. For, like, this one, we've got... There you go. We've got a thing that lets you know that the ones with the gray have no air at top, and the brown ones are open at the top. Which is nice, because then you can set up game encounters, those sort of things, just using that. But these are all built in, they're all tabbed. You can search through them as needed. You've also got a thing where you can narrow it down from just tokens to maps, tiles, and textures, portraits, and then everything. A word of warning is that everything really does include everything. So you will, if you put a search in here and it goes through the web and everything, it really will find everything, including some stuff that probably isn't appropriate for game. So just be careful about that and be aware of that. But you've also got your library, which is quite literally just your uploads. Here we got Froggy here. He's a little squished. But pretty much just allows you to pull up anything as needed. So if you've put it on here for a game, and you might need it again later, or you want to use it for something else, or put something else together, you can do that. This right here is incredibly useful. You can also create new folders within your uploads, which I should really do, and I've been very lazy and not organized it.
Me too.
But you can do that. You can organize it as much as you want. You just have to remember to actually use the tool. And that I think is the core on Roll20. If you use what's available, you can do almost anything. But I quite often forget the kind of things I can do in this system.
Oh, there's tons of things that we don't use, and that there's in times that sometimes one of us encounters it, like just designs an encounter because we're like, I want to use this tool today.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and sometimes it works great, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's part of GMing, is finding out what works for you and what doesn't. Alright, moving on, the next thing over, it looks like a newspaper. At least that's how I've always described it. It's the Journal. And, someone created a Tinkerfriendo. This is where you would add character sheets. I'm just going to show you. You have your add button right here, and it's going to pop up. It's going to ask you want a character, a handout, or a folder. This little thing here with this plus minus, that's a folder. And then this orange thing is a handout. Handouts are just text stuff. Yeah, they don't have access to character sheets.
Yeah. Sorry, so, for example, that little thing that said, this tunnel has air on top and this doesn't, you can put that as a handout so you don't have to have it on your map, so that all your players can go in and check that. It's like, oh, does that have air on top or not? Go into it, see the handout. Oh, yeah, it does have air on top.
On top of that, one nice thing about handouts is that there is a little button right here on top that says show to players, which will force the handout to show to everyone. It will literally just pop up on their screen. In this case, we've got the credits for all the free map stuff, which we'll get to. That way the artists are all credited for their work. But you can do that for your own handouts or your own images or all sorts of things. For example, if you've got an NPC and you've got an image of him and you really want to show people what that NPC looks like as he's looking down over his glasses at them and scoffing at their request, you can pop up an image and send it out to everyone so they all see it at the same time. Which really helps as far as storytelling because it gives everyone a sort of a starting point to work off of. On character sheets, here, let me create a new one. You've got character, And it's going to pop up and show you all these options. This is specifically why I wanted to create a new one. You've got an avatar, which is going to be the image that you want of that character, and it's just a little rectangular image that'll pop up in the corner. You've got the name. When you create a new one, it'll give you a randomly generated, nearly impronounceable name every single time. I've actually been laughing at this feature since it was released, really wishing we could at least choose a thematic setting for the random name generation, but it's just gibberish. It's always been gibberish since 2012.
Oh, yucks, a scar.
Yes.
Little Lauren Ipsum.
Yep. Now, there are some important things here. In players' journals, so in other words, this journal tab that I just pointed out, that will determine who can see it. You don't have to let everyone see your character sheet if you don't want to. It really depends on the type of game you're playing. On games where there's a potential for betrayal or people doing their own things, it's probably best not to let everyone look at your character sheet. But on more open or team-based games, personally, I don't have a problem with it, but that's as far as running games, and that's not the purview of this video. So if we want everyone to be able to see it, we can click All Players. I will note that anyone that is a GM or a co-GM will see all character sheets whether or not they're added to all players' journals. And then you've got can be edited and controlled by. So just because everyone can see it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be able to edit sheets, though. So you can actually change that here. So for example, if we want this to be Locus's sheet, we would set so that Locus is the one can edit it. Now GMs can always edit sheets. That's your power as a GM. And you've got tags here. So if you have a ridiculous number of NPCs, you can put tags. Makes it easier. One of the other nice things is that default tokens. I'm actually going to pull a token out here really quick. We're going to use Jurgen. And he is on the token layer, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And you see the bars I was talking about? Those are the 3 little numbers you can put in. But this is, let's say this is Ohuk's chosen token. If we select it and we put certain values in, it will save those values. We use select token, so it's all brought onto the character sheet. Now I can go ahead and delete this token, and from the journal I'll be able to actually click on this little icon right here and drag that onto the table if it'll let me. There we go. So now that token has been saved under the name. So if you have to switch pages and you don't want to copy paste or you want to bring stuff through, you can just click on the name and drag it right on the tabletop. And any of the settings or numbers based on character sheets that are saved onto that token will come along with it.
Hot pro tip, because it's a thing that a lot of people, myself included, often forget about, is that if there's a lot of settings that you have to do at the token layer, and if you edit or change those settings at the token layer, it'll be fine for that token, but you actually have to delete and reselect the default token if you want it updated in the character sheet. So it'll remember things like stats and numbers and update in the character sheet, but say if you change permissions, you do have to reselect that token.
Yeah, and that's we're getting there. That's something else we can do. Right here, bio and info is great for players to be able to take notes. So if you just need to put info down or backstory or those kind of things, depending on what character sheet you're using, it may be your entire character sheet. It depends on the system, what character sheet you're using, what game you're playing. And every single character sheet has a GM notes page. So if you need to put information relative to that character, you can put it, and it will only be visible to GMs. It says GM, but in this case, it could be whoever, how many ever GMs you have will be able to see those notes. But it's a good place for you to put things about characters to remind yourself.
Oh, shit.
Sorry for that.
Angie's very passionate about it.
She's very passionate about GM notes.
She wish.
Anyway, so once you've saved that, you get back to this page, which is just like our Tinker Friendo here, which I'll pull up. And you see that you've got 2 other tabs. You've got a character sheet, and you've got an attribute and abilities. The attributes and abilities is really two things. One, it's going to take the inputs from the character sheet and give you what are called the macro things, the at intelligence, at dex, that basically is shorthand for different stats within the game. But then over here is abilities. Abilities allows you to pre-make
Kill
macros.
them.
Okay? And on top of that, so we got edit right here. This is your move up and down, and this is your delete. The little pencil here, when we edit, basically we can just do anything that we do to type into the text bar, like roll d20, not do, and it'll save that as an ability. Now we can just roll that from the sheet. There goes the 3D dice. It's a 1! And again, notice that that's a red one, showing it as the lowest possible number. But you've also got options here. You've got token options, which means for this selected token, you can actually add it as an option. Or you can actually have it in the macro bar, which right under here, Tinker Friendo, new ability 0, it shows it at the bottom of the bar, so you don't have to type anything in, you can just click the button. And that will save you a lot of time if you're not comfortable with the typing system, or you have players that really are having a hard time with this system. It's really helpful for that. But if you can teach them how to use the text chat and how to do the roll syntax, it will help them a lot more, especially in more complicated games.
I just straight up for GMing along the bottom have a just row of universal macros that are just d20 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right now, there are no character sheets here. And we'll get to that in a minute. Dan, do you want to cover the side tools as well as mapping, since those kind of overlap?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan and let him talk about a lot of the user interface on here on the side and about mapping.
So, generally the first thing you look at, right now we've really only been on one page. So if you take a look at right up top there's a little blue up in the top right, the page toolbar. If you expand that, you see that there's a whole bunch of other ones that we can go to. I actually do recommend you keep kind of a blank GM screen one on it, just so you can kind of store little things that you might have to move between maps there. But before we go into any of that, we'll just go to the very, very first one, the Random Battle Town. And as you highlight it, you can see that, once again, there's a few little options. Duplicate page, page settings, you can scroll it back and forth to change positions. But for now, we'll go into the settings. From here, you can you've got your width, your heights, pretty obvious based on, you're going to want to put that, essentially to the size you want. Especially if you're using a scaled system like, your D&Ds, your Pathfinders, you'll be able to set a particular scale here. And it generally will just consider it, and it will generally just kind of make either a square or the few other options a little bit down. Going down, the little background square, if you're not using anything, that will once again allow you to put in hex code color as the background. Really great if, like voices, you do kind of the hand-drawn style, or if you need to have just a blank color to put some of your token information on. Grid, as I said, it'll kind of build the grid based on kind of the units it says up there. And that will make just essentially on your one of the layers, which we'll get to in a second, something that your tokens will snap to. Diagonals is essentially a thing to do with distance calculation. If you...
Yes.
Different systems calculate kind of how diagonal distances works. Pretty much, if you know your system, you'll know where that comes in. Otherwise, if you're just doing a general open-ended system or not using a grid, not terribly important. the type there allows you to switch between a square style grid or like a hex style wargaming grid. And then the color is the color of the grid itself, not necessarily anything to do with the background. Then there's a bunch of advanced options, including Fog of War, which we've got all kinds of background noise tonight.
Boof.
So these come to there's little things when we go into different options in tokens. Both Fog of War and Lighting are options that essentially allow you to have hidden information on your map. So as it stands right now, when you bring the players into the scene, they'll be able to see everything on that map, fully scroll around, see any tokens that you've put down. With the Fog of War or Dynamic Lighting, you can set it up for hidden information. Either with Fog of War is more of a general, hey, based on tokens, this is the visibility, whereas Dynamic Lighting is like a more advanced line of sight mechanic. GM opacity there is one particular layer, which once we go into the sidebar, I'll explain. And that's essentially a layer that only you can see, so it likes to kind of ghost the images a little bit. And the last one right down there before we get to your delete and archive is play on load. So if you have something set up in the jukebox, you can literally set a song to start going right the moment you get into that scene. Archive page, say if you have a castle that you might get back to later but don't want to just delete it from the game, you can take it out of your active settings so you're not rifling through 100 different pages up top. And if you've got something that you will never get back to, you can delete it. So if we go back up to that top bar, you see that there's a little player's flag. And that is kind of designates what the players are seeing. So if you drag that over to, let's say, the first random battle town, it will bring all the players here, but not necessarily change your view. This is good if you're kind of setting up something in a scene. So, for example, I'm still looking at that first start scene, so I could prepare some tokens or do some information in secret, or even prepare the next scene while the players are looking at Random Battle Town. But you do have to click into it to see it. And then we can see our nice little prefabricated town. So, with this, I'll kind of go along the side. So if you see right over there on the left, you have a toolbar, and that's generally your mapping and dealing with the world tools. The first one, just right up there, is a selection movement tool, and the other is a pan view tool. The select move is going to be just essentially if you need to highlight a token or move somebody around, that's the one you're going to use to not accidentally draw a line across. The pan view, especially if you're dealing with a big map, say in a more wargamey style, that will allow you to kind of just move the camera in big sweeping motions. You can also kind of use your mouse wheel controls for this as well. So that old middle mouse button will let you do a kind of similar to the pan move. The next one down is your layers, and this is actually a fairly important bit of nitty-gritty mapping, because there are two layers that you will deal with most of the time. One is the map and background layer. So if you highlight this is essentially your scenery in the background. And right now, if you can kind of see where I'm going to move it around, on this layer, I can now move around the little the little background that they have there, and then completely screw it up. Because I was hoping that I could just Control-Z that back into place. When things are on this layer, they don't have statistics, they don't have essentially any technology behind them. They are props, and there is absolutely no way for the player to interact with them. They can still see them, but they can't interact with them. The next layer is the objects and tokens layer, and this is the thing where things can move around, which is useful because this is the one where you can set particular permissions for tokens for players to be able to control their own token, as well as since everything is on a layer above the background, you're not accidentally going to grab a house and move it around when you mean to grab a guard and move them around.
I hate it when they have them.
And then the last layer is the GM info overlay. So this is, as I was saying back where you could set that opacity, this is a layer that only you can see. One that probably every one of us here doesn't use as enough as they should because we all got used to being a stream camera. But this essentially sets a semi-opaque image or token there that can either have a little GM info, designate where traps are, or just essentially give you little tools for helping keep track of your encounters while keeping that information hidden from the players, as they cannot see it. You can also... So let's take a look at this little Froggo here. We'll go into this quickly, just because it's good to do this with the layers. If you right-click on a object in any of these layers, it'll give you a whole bunch of different options. Many of them a little... I don't think I need to explain what copy-paste is to you. But the one we're going to look at is the one right at the bottom, which is the layer tool. So right now this is on the GM layer. If I can move it to any of these layers. So for example, I'm going to move this to the token layer, and you can see how kind of the opacity ended. And that means the players can now see that. So an example of something you could do with that is if you have tokens in ambush, or a little hidden pit, or a switch that they need to search out, you can keep that on your GM layer and just switch the layer when you want them to deal with it. Going back over to our sidebar, the next thing is one that I use quite a bit. Which is the which is essentially your drawing tool. You've got a draw shape, which if you're familiar with MS Paint and you're kind of familiar with the way this works. When you click on it, up the top you'll see two colors. One is your outline, one is your interior. You can set your line thickness, and then essentially you have two options. If you just use a regular click, it'll draw a shape there, or if you hold Alt, it will draw an ellipse. So, two pretty basic shapes that you can just whip out right there. Freehand is... Don't worry, your players will discover freehand soon enough on their own. And then the line tool is more of... is once again a little, pick a point, pick another point. It'll create a line, pick a third point, and then double click and it'll connect all the shapes. You'll also notice that whenever you hover over these, it'll give you a little tooltip. So It's not a thing that you have to remember, the little kind of mouse and keyboard controls, like holding Alt to give a ellipse. And then the text key, once again, exactly like MS Paint, pretty much. You click, you can set the font, you got your text. The one below it is, it's the fun one. It's you can do fancy things. If you want special effects, you can do little particle effects. Definitely, if you like that little bit of flair, it's a cool thing to do. Your zoom is right below it. Another thing that you can do with the middle mouse button just by scrolling in and out. Or if you look on the upper right corner, right next to where the blue page toolbar is, there is a manual kind of slide you can use. You've got below that a ruler, which will remember when you kind of set back in the page options how much unit was. This is essentially how, especially if you're not using a grid or playing like maybe a more wargamey Warhammer style game, this is how you can find those distances. Also good for checking line of sight, because if you hold shift, if you hit shift on a token, it'll go to kind of the center.
Oh, that one's handy to know. I was trying to figure that out during Ellie's one-shot, actually, how to use that thing.
And once again, remember when it comes to those diagonal calculations, that's where that's going to come into play too.
Because some systems don't count 1, 2, 3. So, you're going to have to choose the one that counts correctly for the system you're using.
Alright, the one below that comes down to the dynamic lighting, which I kind of skipped over on the layers tab, because I figure that's a bit advanced and we're already hitting an hour and haven't got to questions yet. But if you wanted to set up your kind of fog of war, your lighting, that's where you do it. The next one down is turn order. A lot of RPGs have initiative systems in them. And when you bring this up, it shows it to all the players. Once again, we go to our little Froggo. You can right-click on him, add turn. And that will put him on the turn order. Generally, at this point, especially, you can kind of give him an initiative value. Let's give him a 16. And then I'm just going to add him a bunch so that we have something to example.
Something that's also really cool is if you're going to roll initiative, if you select the token first and then do your roll, the value you get will automatically be added to the initiative order for the token.
Yeah, and a lot of character sheets have that built right in.
Right, and I guess it would work better if we didn't have 3 versions of the character and it's not sure which one to do, but yeah.
Yeah. So then that little blue bar at the end, so after you have it set up, you have your sword options. So obviously when everybody kind of jams out their initiative at first, it's just going to be in the order of whoever rolled dice first. So this is essentially your, I'm going to, sort everything. Most of the time, it's just hitting that descending button, and that gives you your highest number first, right down. And if you see that little arrow right next to it, right next to the blue options icon, that's what's going to shift your initiative forward.
Jay, what is that?
Don't worry. Just burning a little piece of string.
And as said, once again, kind of going with the mapping
That's
stuff.
good, because your children seem to have gotten my pyromaniac-ness.
When you lay something on the tokens layer, for example, our Tinker Friendo, well, okay, actually, let me just quickly assign something to him. Tinker Friendo is the frog. So if we drag Tinker Friendo out onto the grid on the token layer, he's going to come out token sized. And we'll snap to the grid. If you drag Tinker Friendo out, if you drag him out on the map layer, the background layer, he is still going to come out at the right size, but isn't going to have any of the snapping or any interactability. Same thing as if you just grab a graphic on the objects layer, it's going to do its best to accommodate your grid, whereas if you do it on the map and background, it's going to just jam it out at the size that the graphic is, so you might have to do some adjustment. So, let's go back to our map background layer, just to give you a little bit of example of what you can do. So as said, this is like Jay started this and loaded up like this really nice, like just these defaults you can get, and you can see that they're all sorts of nice little defaults, and this one has stuff on it, so thankfully we can interact with some things. So here we can see that we've got a few tokens out on the map, plus, and they are all in the GM layer because they have that little opacity to them. Jay just moved it right to the token layer. Now this would be when the players could see it.
Don't worry about it.
What I want to give
I burned a piece
example
of string. It's okay.
Is let's move two of these things to the background layer. So as kind of said, if you can see it, right now we're on the map and background layer. The good thing about this is when you go to the map layer, it sets every layer above it as opaque. So now both the GM layer and the background layer are opaque. You can see on this layer, if I grab the background, it moves everything, which is not ideal. So say this is the position. We want... Oh no, I want all this to stay here. Like, we're not going to be moving this around. This is a part of my background. What you can do is, by using a shift command, so hold shift while you click, and so highlight two of them. then highlight that background as well so that you've grabbed everything. And if you do your right click and go advanced, you've got a few other options here. The ones we're particularly interested in, because once again, I think a lot of these are pretty self-evident, like flipping horizontally or flipping vertically, is group and ungroup. So with everything highlighted in your background, especially if you have clusters of objects, if you group everything together, they become an object group. So you can kind of see how when I'm moving it around now, I no longer have to worry about moving the background as those carts kind of magically stay in one place. This is kind of good if say you're building a set of tunnels, or you're building, say, a table with numerous graphics on it, that you can just group it all together and then move the table around without having to move the table, then move the plate, then move the fork. Beyond that, the one other neat thing you can do sometimes, especially, as said, like there are so many options for beautiful and pretty and well-made pre-generated backgrounds, but a lot of them, this already has a lot of stuff, but you can get in a lot of those packs, like see how in this background there's the road, there's the rocks, there's those carts, just as I locked them in. There's ones where you just use the pieces and you can kind of Lego set the background together. So don't think you're always stuck completely to a pre-generated map. And I think that's pretty much the basics of mapping.
Okay then. Yeah, that pretty much gives you a brief overview. Really, the best thing to do with mapping is to just play with it. It'll fall into place for you in due time. Okay, I'm gonna quickly cover the jukebox, which won't take very long, and then we'll look at pretty much the advanced settings for a campaign, and then I guess we'll do questions. So I'll try to get through this relatively quickly. Right here you see a music box, well, a little music note and some lists here. This is your jukebox. Right now we don't have anything in here, but we can go straight here to add. And we're going to be looking, you got two things. You can create a playlist, so if you're looking for a specific set of tracks you want played, you can do that. And then you've got track, which is specifically for one item. So what's really nice about the jukebox now, even though we don't use SoundCloud anymore, is that they have integrated tabletop audio, battle bards, Incompetech, and Fanburst, which is kind of like SoundCloud, into their jukebox system. Now, Incompetech is pretty much entirely license-free music that you can use, which is great, especially for us because we upload onto YouTube afterwards. So we avoid the issues of things like, well, being flagged for copyright claims. It's unlikely that will happen, but it could, certainly. And that's mostly music, those sort of things. Not so much sounds, but a lot of music and sort of background noise. Tabletop audio is kind of a mix of everything. If we play Desert Bazaar, for example, you've got music, you've got sounds of people behind. So if you're just looking for an atmospheric kind of thing, that's where tabletop audio is really useful. It's just background noise, really. Prevents you from having long pauses of silence. But it can also be maybe a little distracting, and as a GM, you're gonna just kind of have to find, what your groove is as far as audio is concerned. If background noise and music is too much for you, you've got just, I believe these are mostly just background sounds. Yeah, these are just background sounds, and like I was talking about, some of these get a little loud, so you generally want to adjust the volume. And then Incompetech is pretty much just music. So you've got your background sounds with Battle Bards, and you've got your music with Incompetech, and you've got both with Tabletop Audio. So if we like what we're hearing, we can click the little plus button here and add it over to our jukebox. And we've got options here. First of all, you can completely change the name of it. So if you want to put that this is spy music or chamber music or page so-and-so music, you can have that right there. You've also got options here to have it repeat. So instead of stopping when it's done, it will just loop and play that song. When it stops, it'll restart. You've also got individual volumes, so if you're looking for like really faint background noise just to sort of add to a, sort of just set a scene away, you can do that. If you're looking for really sort of more foreground fanfare, you can do that as well. And once you've got things here in your jukebox, then you can open up your maps, go to your settings, and you can actually have play on load. So if you've got a specific tavern and you've got a tavern music or something like that, or you have the time to sort of set things up ahead of time, you can actually go straight here, select your song, and then save it. And now we know that when we come to this random battle screen and we bring the players over, it'll start playing that music at our volume level that we've pre-selected. We can adjust this so that you can try to get it as much automation as you can, or not. If you want to do it freestyle, you can entirely too.
Bullshit.
It's not bullshit, it's true.
No, that's not what I was talking about.
But yeah, that's the jukebox. It's really very simple to use. It gives you a lot of sort of panache for a stream. But it does limit things slightly, whereas with SoundCloud you could just bring links in and play pretty much anything on it. Now you're somewhat limited, and they did that as sort of a protection to them so they can't get sued for copyright infringement.
Yeah, which actually brings a question from chat, which is, can I have my own background ambience in the jukebox? Could I still use those?
No. Unfortunately, there isn't a way to do that. Unless, well, I say that. Unless you set up a... Hold on. Load, please. There we go. If you set up a Fanburst account, you should be able to do that. Unfortunately, Fanburst, like SoundCloud, basically checks for things. So if you upload it, you might not necessarily have it for very long. They might remove it. But you could try that. I would try that first. The second thing to do would obviously be to link everyone the music ahead of time, or if you just want it on stream, so the person who's recording could play that music ahead of time, which is something we do on Voices. But unfortunately, I don't know of any way to just play music direct ambience through Roll20. And worth noting is that if you use copyrighted music on Twitch, your VOD will be silenced during those parts that are using copyrighted music. Which is fine if it's just you playing around, but if you want to eventually upload it onto YouTube, it'll be muted on Twitch, and then it will still upload the full audio to YouTube, which means you could get that VOD muted there and potentially a copyright strike on YouTube.
It's messy.
Yeah. Music is not for everyone. It's a whole other thing you have to manage, but it is a powerful tool that exists. I keep seeing an inspiration. People keep linking all these different background audio things, and almost all of them are already set up through Roll20. So I felt it was good to point that out. This is the other really powerful part. These are macros, which we talked about under token actions, those sort of things. But we've also got playing card decks. You can actually have a proper set of playing cards, and you can edit all of their details. You can change the faces, you can change the backgrounds. It's all editable. You can shuffle them. You can deal them out to specific players based on where their hold on, there it is. Based on where their name is. You can see, like, I can give Dan a card. I can't see what Dan's cards are, but he has a card now, and I can shuffle one to myself, and then I can see what my cards are. I can't see his, but I can see mine. See, it shows the background for that. Now, I can steal his cards. So you have a game system where people can steal cards. Guess what? Assuming that he agrees, I can steal it.
I had to Elsa it.
Yeah, I figured. But, yeah, so that's another thing that's in there. You've also got rollable tables. These are incredibly powerful if you are playing a game that uses tables. So instead of having a separate list and you roll dice and then consult it, you can actually just add whole new things. And on top of that, you can create it as a token. So you can put it on the tabletop and roll it from the tabletop right there. It's kind of awesome. It's really neat for those people that like those kind of randomized list of things. But again, it's something you have to set up ahead of time. So whether that's for you or not, that's something people have to decide as a GM.
Question from chat: is there a way to see other players' card hands?
Yes, you can change the settings that allow you basically to do that. Because there are options here. You can deal cards. For example, I can deal 7 cards to everybody, or to just some players. And you can also do offline players too, so that all of us get a certain number of cards. And there's actually settings in here and in the other settings that would allow you to actually change things. So, lots of cool stuff there that can be played around with. These kind of options here, you can click the name. You can show deck to players. Players can draw cards. Cards in deck are infinite, so you don't have to worry about having a certain set. Nightbot is just really on a rampage. Sorry about that, Eva. And you've got specifically, you can GM choose back, show fronts. You've got discard pile options. When played, face up. So, for example, if I take my jack and I play it on the table, it plays it face up. But we can also change it face down. So if I take my joker and play it... come on now. Now it's not going to do it, of course. But if I save the changes, then it would work, of course. Yeah, if I do that, now it plays face down. And you can change the backgrounds and the front of the cards. You don't have to use regular cards.
And so to go with the chat, you also, just like any token, you can rotate them. So yeah, you can do facing as well. You can make things very, very...
Yep. And then these are the things that specifically show you what it is. You can remove this whole image of the card, change it out for what you want, or delete the card entirely. You've got a lot of options here. Card backing, you can create a whole custom card back and put it on there. I've done that before. It's a lot of fun.
Even just looking up a different card color backing, if you just need 2 different decks, then you need them to be distinct.
You can do that as well. And you can have multiple different types of decks. I can add a second deck here. I didn't create what I wanted, but you could. You could just basically create. There, I did it the wrong way. Here it is. Duplicate deck is what I wanted to do. Not. Yeah. We can have a different one here, and now there's multiple, and you can shuffle them. So it'll shuffle those. You can actually deal from separate decks. There's lots of things you can do with that. It is definitely something to play with if you're using a system like that, but if not, it is just another tool that may or may not help you play the game you want, the way you want to play it. I think we're going to go for another 10 minutes, if that's okay, Dan?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, we're a little bit safe.
Take some questions then, or...
Yeah.
We could probably, honestly, we could do another one of these where we talk about more advanced
I think we may almost have to. I don't think we can necessarily get to everything. So yeah, I think in 10 minutes, if people have any questions, we can do that.
Because like even with mapping stuff, like I would still like to go over some of like the tips and tricks and cool things. Because honestly, like a lot of the stuff in Roll20, like especially things like virtual dice and are to kind of emulate that you sitting at your table, sitting at a table with friends feel. Whereas things like mapping or the table or all of that are things unique to playing on the internet, and they can let you have powerful options that you couldn't easily have sitting at a real physical table.
It's another one where I haven't even figured out the way in, have I?
So yeah, question time, I would say.
Okay, well, anyone that's here in voice chat, do you have any questions? You can unmute yourself now, it's okay.
It's like, you can come out now. The witch is dead.
They won't beat us anymore if we speak.
I mean,
That's a lie.
we might.
No guarantees.
They might beat me, and to be fair, I'd probably deserve it.
You probably like it.
Yeah.
Correct and correct.
Alright, moving on. Do we have any questions relevant to the stream? As we're we're a half hour past.
Whoopsie doodles.
Honestly, as far as covering the core topics, I have nothing. You guys did such a great job that it's very comprehensive to me. There are a few things that I will probably go back and review at a later date just to refresh my memory, but you covered everything that I had come in ready to ask.
Okay, and there's more to it. Roll20 is one of the things. There is a amazing amount of depth of the tool. You don't have to use it to that depth. Really, if you can scribble some lines on a white background with a grid and know how to roll a dice, you're good to play. That's the truth of the matter. GMing does not have to be a super complicated thing. Certainly, we'd like to show you what it can do, and that was the intention of tonight. But it's not something that you have to. You are not missing out or holding things back by not using every tool in the toolbox. Playing the game, enjoying the game, and spending time with friends and sort of challenging yourself, that's the important part. Not making it look like the best thing in the world. Not showing off your amazing mapping skills or utilizing advanced dynamic lighting or building custom character sheets. All the GMs we have in our group that do that kind of stuff, they do it as a labor of love, but it is not a necessity. Certainly not within our group is it a necessity. Certainly not in role-playing, in my opinion, in general. Because, let's be honest, the true role-playing is just on a kitchen countertop with a dry erase pad at best. If not just grid paper,
The real role-playing was inside you all along.
Well, kind of. It is more important to play the game and have fun than it is to make everything look perfect.
Says the one who wastes hours making everything look perfect.
I still don't think anything ever looks perfect, but I do waste hours doing that.
Oh yeah.
But see, that's my purview. I have the absolute ability to. Do I need any of that stuff? Do I need custom character sheets for my game? No. I could have easily chosen a system that I don't have to do any homebrewing for. I easily could have made Outer Jaeger a 13th Age game, for example. I'm sure Dan could probably imagine how easy that conversion would have been.
We often make the joke that before we, shortly after Outer Jaeger started, it's like, oh, I wish we read Fate.
Yeah, I mean, I almost changed systems 3 times before I went with what I went, and now I'm changing that system to the point that it barely resembles what it came from. There are so many systems out there that are a lot of fun, and there's so many systems out there that, you kind of have to choose the system that makes you comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable playing it, you're not going to be comfortable administrating it, is what it comes down to. If you're good with spreadsheets, just as an example,
I don't know who you are talking about. I
choose-
don't know why I feel attacked.
you probably are far more comfortable with systems that use and pull off of spreadsheets and tables and those kind of things. But if you're not someone, or if you're someone that's much more about verbal storytelling or campfire storytelling or those kind of things, then something like Pathfinder, which does use a lot of those kind of, calculating tables kind of stuff, maybe not your thing. Or, for example, if you're really not into doing skill lists, then games like Rifts are not your thing. But, you have to choose as a GM what's comfortable for you in that, and this has the tools. It truly is system agnostic. There's nothing that I've run into on Roll20 that would keep me from playing a certain things. Now, choosing certain games are not necessarily easier on Roll20, but the tools are there. For example, if there isn't a character sheet that's been made, you have to do a custom, and I think that has to be a whole other stream because I can't cover that in 30 minutes thinking about it. That's going to be a whole other thing. But yeah, I mean, we've shown you that the tools are there, but they are not necessary. It's so much better for people to play the game together and have fun, at least in my mind, than it is to try to make, use of every tool available.
Yeah.
No, it's still fun to know what tools are there.
Of course.
Yeah.
And one day... Sorry, go ahead.
And most definitely. And honestly, looking at that, and I said this earlier, looking at it and wanting to explore a tool can, drive you forward. A lot of Adderjäger is Jay experimenting with kind of custom sheets and character things with that. That came from him exploring custom sheets and character things when we were playing Call of Cthulhu.
Well, even just showing the cards, which I hadn't seen before, I was immediately like, that would be a really interesting tarot-driven plot device rather than an actual game. Like, actually playing a card game of cards.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
could do either.
Yeah, and there are actual role-playing systems that use cards as the determining factor. I have a very good friend that's absolutely convinced that cards are the way to go in role-playing games because it's a more smooth randomization versus the true, random number generation, or pseudo-random number generation, excuse me, that you find in online kind of things. For example, that you can't weight cards unless you're a magician. And if you're a magician and you're GMing, that would be really cool, but it may be not the fairest way to play the game.
This isn't really a question about what was covered here so much, but I would, along with more on character sheets, which you've already said you would do later, I'd love to see more on macros.
Well,
surprising nobody.
I'm going to show you something really cool about Roll20. If you have any questions about how to do something in-game, one of the really neat things is that they do not hide information from you. At the very, very, very bottom of the thing, you've got a question mark right here. Now, something we didn't cover, Dan, we didn't cover the dice rolling system.
Yes, we didn't, and I kind of got at the end of that. There is a dice roller that does it, but that is the first step of learning macros, because then you can translate that into doing it in text, and then you can slowly build on macros and things like that.
Yeah, so for example, you can create an advanced roll for, let's say 2d20 plus 6. You can actually do it as exploding, separate, or compounded, which is a Shadowrun style thing. You can actually set your target number. Let's go 10 plus. And then it'll roll, and it'll actually tell you, it's really slow because of that I got no successes because I didn't roll anything below 10. That probably wasn't the best way to show that, but, it's something you can actually see. But then if you click, you see it's 2d20 plus 6 is less than 10. So you can see that macro right there is pretty much written for you. If you're really lazy and just want to roll dice, you can just click these dice images, and it will roll that size dice. Die. Whatever. Sorry, again.
I was just gonna say, come play Jay's new game where the core mechanic is rolling 2d20 plus a bonus, and you're trying to roll under 10. It's
No,
called Misery Land.
no. But right here at the very bottom, you've got a question mark of the tools, and there's three things. There's help and docs, shortcut reference, again talking about those shortcuts if you want to be really fast on the trigger and everything, and report a bug, because bugs do happen. They happen less than they used to. Roll20 is now rather stable compared to, 2012, 2013, when it liked to implode occasionally, and players could connect, and you'd have like 3 players on one instance and 2 on another, and there were times it didn't go so well. But specifically here, help and docs will open up the wiki for Roll20, and it has everything. It's got every walkthrough on how to do macros, everything we've covered tonight, and a heck of a lot more. Custom character sheet creation, API content, which is something we haven't even covered. API, by the way, is a coding system within Roll20 that can do things like check dice, move markers, have tokens do random patrols and walk around the board, reset fog of war. It is... If you're really into coding, there's some cool stuff that you can do with Roll20 through automation. But
super simple example that you can see in our videos. In my initiative tracker, there's an API script that tracks the escalation die and ticks it up automatically every time initiative rolls over.
Puts it out as a attribute that we can then add to macros in-game. So, for example, when we roll damage, we can automatically include that at escalation die in order to automatically have everything that we roll be basically connected with that escalation die roll. But there's macros, all the things. It's amazing what they're able to do with a very basic syntax. And if you've had any experience with Roll20, with HTML or mostly HTML, the macro system is really pretty basic. It is very simple, but it's something you got to learn to use. But certainly you've got all sorts of options here, and it's just wiki.roll20.net. That'll take you right to it. It is probably the best source of information. Because it's got everything. These are written not only by users who have been playing with the system since 2012, but also the actual developers and coders that are actually making things behind the scenes. So they update it pretty regularly. There are video series on here if you want to learn about things, maybe at a slower pace than what we've covered tonight. And it's a good thing I have to reference it quite a bit, because even I forget things. Especially since I do a lot of custom character sheets, I gotta check it all the time, because I forget how HTML works, because it's not a straight HTML CSS system. It's got little things that aren't the same. So, yeah, it's something to look for. It's easy to get to. It's right here at the very bottom of the toolbar, and players have this thing too. If I come back and if I exit and rejoin as a player, it's going to reload for me here. You can see I have a lot less tools now, but that question mark that allows me to get to help and docs is still there. So, it's something that you can find if you're curious about it, you want to look it up, how to do things in-game. Any other questions? Nope.
I'm guessing not.
Okay.
I don't really know enough to ask. I was mostly just watching to find out a little more about how the thing works in general.
Well,
Yeah.
No, that's kind of the boat I'm in.
Yeah, you guys covered it pretty freaking
You done good.
you did good.
whatever we forgot, the wiki will have the information, or even the wiki might have some videos that'll cover things maybe a little more in depth. Things I would love to cover but would take 2 hours up and of themselves. Custom character sheets are really cool, but also something that has to be covered by themselves. Dynamic lighting is so cool, but it would take forever to cover that and do that within a session. lots of neat things that are perhaps, more advanced than we need to cover right now. For basic player things, if we exit out of the game here, you can actually go to Tools, and you've got actually a compendium. So if you're playing Pathfinder, 5th edition, the Dungeon World, they've actually got access to the SRDs and the rule systems that you can then be integrated into the sidebar of your game. So you can basically have all that, a searchable menu for rules and spells and those kind of things built right into the sidebar. They're working on adding more of these. Unfortunately, it's only these 3 systems right now. Hopefully, in the future, we'll see even more of that. But for now, that's an option for people that are interested in running 5th edition, Pathfinder, or Dungeon World. Other thing I wanted to show, and I'm not seeing it here, tutorial? You can actually pull up, oh, it just launched it straight into it. You can actually pull up under Games the tutorial. And that'll actually walk you through each individual feature just like we did here. It'll have you drawing on the character sheet, trying things out. It's probably the best way to go. If you have any more questions or we didn't cover something specifically, that will cover how to actually use the system. I think it'll ask you whether you want to do GM or player. Hopefully it still does that. No, it's just a straight up tutorial. But it'll actually cover things maybe a little better than we did. It maybe not as in depth as some other things, but it'll cover things like Fog of War, turn trackers better. There's a whole section here on macros. They'll actually teach you how to create them and type things in. And if anyone has time for that, I would recommend doing it. But we're 37 minutes past when I said we'd wrap this up, so I think I'm going to call it there. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for those of you that came into the chat and into the voice chat to answer and ask questions. And thank you to Dan and Locust for coming out here to assist with GMing duties.
Oh yeah, I did a lot.
Yeah. Well,
Clearly you're the backbone of this entire operation.
Bullshit.
He's the puppeteer.
Nothing.
anyway,
He's got his hand right up my
okay then.
strings.
That's
Wow.
a little much. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. You all have a
Why aren't you
wonderful
streaming
evening.
that?
And good night.
Not allowed on Twitch.
Yeah, we need to do that. Something we can collect different type of tokens for.
Yeah.